The crystalline corridors of the Galactic Research Institute refracted light in ways that still made Dr. Madison Hayes's eyes water. After 3 weeks on station, she couldn't decide if the alien architecture was beautiful or just painful to look at. Like everything else in consortium space, it was designed by and for species that didn't share humanity's evolutionary baggage. She caught her reflection in one of the prismatic walls. Disheveled brown hair, dark circles under her eyes, and the same rumpled lab coat she'd been wearing for the past 36 hours. The Viking researchers she passed, with their silicon-based bodies precision-engineered for scientific work, never looked anything less than perfect. Dr. Hayes, a harmonic voice, chimed behind her. "Your specimen delivery has been delayed." Again. Madison turned to face Dr. Zach Still, the Viking project lead whose crystalline form seemed to blend with the corridor walls. His tone carriers, the floating crystalline shards that transmitted his voice, vibrated with what she'd learned to recognize as barely concealed contempt. "Not delayed," Madison corrected, clutching her datapad closer. "Cancelled. I know you redirected my requisition for human brain scans to section review. For the 3rd time. The consortium's resources are finite." Zach Still's tone carriers pulsed with cool blue light. "Dedicating quantum bandwidth to transmit primitive neural patterns from Sol seems inefficient." Madison bit back her first response. She'd known this assignment would be an uphill battle, but after humanity's successful petition to join the consortium, she'd hoped for at least a pretense of scientific objectivity. "Inefficient," she repeated, pulling up her latest results on her datapad. "Like how our primitive neural patterns solved the Kovlak maze in half the time of your best eye. A statistical anomaly." Zach Still dismissed. "Human consciousness is too chaotic for proper ship integration. 3 centuries of consortium research. 3 centuries of trying the same thing and expecting different results." Madison swiped through her data. "You're trying to build true AI consciousness from scratch, but you're ignoring the one template we know works: organic minds." The Viking's tone carrier shifted to a deep purple. "The human brain is messy, inefficient, prone to emotional corruption, and capable of intuitive leaps that your best systems can't match." Madison interrupted. "You're so focused on computational efficiency that you're missing the forest for the trees. Or you would be, if you had trees on your homeworld." A small crowd of researchers had gathered, drawn by the confrontation. Madison spotted several species she recognized: the gaseous Heftel, the crystalline Viking, even a few energy-based Zirane, but no other humans. She was the only one in this sector, pushing research that most of the consortium considered a dead end. Perhaps Zach Still's tone was diplomatic now that they had an audience. "You would care to demonstrate these intuitive advantages. The Gamma Lab is available for a controlled comparison." Madison smiled. She'd been waiting for this opening. "Happy to. My latest neural mapping already loaded into the test core this morning. While you were filing bureaucratic objections to my research, I was running simulations." She gestured for the gathered scientists to follow as she headed for the Gamma Lab. The Viking project lead had no choice but to accompany them, his tone carriers now a frustrated red. The Gamma Lab's holographic displays came to life as they entered, showing 2 ship AI cores, one built to consortium standard protocols, the other patterned on Madison's neural mapping data. She'd spent months convincing the Institute to let her bring even this small test core online. "Standard navigation challenge," she announced, pulling up the parameters. "Let's see how each core handles the Kepler defense scenario." As the simulation began, Madison allowed herself a small smile. She had 300 hours of human brain scans in her database, carefully chosen to show exactly what she needed. The consortium thought human consciousness was messy and inefficient. She was about to show them just how powerful a little chaos could be. The Kepler defense simulation had left the Gamma Lab in chaos, not because Madison's human pattern AI had failed, but because it had succeeded in a way that violated half a dozen supposedly immutable rules of computational logic. The consortium researchers were still arguing about it 3 days later. Madison sat alone in her lab at 300 station time, surrounded by holographic representations of human neural patterns. The blue glow of jazz musician brain scans filled the room, data she'd specifically requested from Earth. Her colleagues had found the choice baffling. Why study musicians when you could analyze mathematicians or quantum physicists? Processing complete on the Miles Davis session, her lab AI announced. Comparison with the John Coltrane pattern shows a 67% variance in neural response to identical musical phrases. Perfect, Madison mumbled, taking another sip of her coffee. Real coffee, shipped from Earth at ridiculous expense. That's exactly what we want. Show me the improvisation segments. The holograms shifted, highlighting areas of intense neural activity during jazz solos. Traditional consortium AI architecture sought to eliminate variables, to find the one correct solution to any given problem. But human consciousness, especially during creative acts like musical improvisation, thrived on possibilities. Her lab door chimed. Enter, she called out, expecting another junior researcher with questions about her unorthodox methods. Instead, Captain Rendla of the Zurian Defense Force floated in, her energy form contained within the standard environmental field. The captain had observed the Kepler defense test, watching in silence as Madison's AI core had found a solution that the consortium had declared impossible. Dr. Hayes, the captain's field pulsed with formal acknowledgement. You're working late. Madison gestured at the floating neural patterns. Jazz never sleeps, Captain. What brings you to my corner of the Institute? Curiosity. Renla moved closer to the holograms. Your test results are causing quite a stir. Several of my colleagues are calling for your research to be suspended. Let me guess. It's too unpredictable. Too chaotic. Madison pulled up the side-by-side comparison of Davis and Coltrane's neural responses. That's exactly why it works. Look at these patterns during improvisation. Both musicians are playing the same piece, but their brains are processing it completely differently. And this helps with ship A. How? Madison stood, excitement overtaking her exhaustion. Traditional ship I fails because it can't actually think. It can calculate, sure, but it can't create. Human consciousness, especially during creative acts, shows us how true intelligence emerges from controlled chaos. She manipulated the hologram, overlaying the jazz patterns with her ship I's response during the Kepler test. See these similarities? My AI didn't just calculate a solution, it improvised one, using patterns we derived from studying human creativity. Rendla's energy field flickered with what might have been amusement. Dr. Zach Still suggests this makes your eye unreliable. Zach Still, Madison snorted, thinks anything he can't predict is unreliable. But space isn't a controlled environment. Real situations require adaptation, creativity, the ability to improvise. The captain moved through the holograms, studying the patterns. Your AI's solution to the Kepler scenario. It shouldn't have worked. The math. The math was perfect, Madison interrupted. It just wasn't the math anyone expected. Like jazz, there are rules, yes, but the magic happens in how you bend them. She brought up another simulation. Watch this. I've been running scenarios all night, comparing responses between traditional AI and my jazz-inspired version. The traditional AI gets stuck in logical loops, trying to find the mathematically perfect solution. Mine. It jams. It tries things. Sometimes it fails, but when it succeeds. The hologram showed a ship threading an impossible course through a debris field, using gravitational interactions in ways that made conventional physics scream. It wasn't elegant by consortium standards, but it was beautiful in its own way. It's not chaos, Madison said softly. It's creativity. And if the consortium wants true AI, they need to stop trying to eliminate variables and start embracing them. Rendla's field pulsed with deep colors. Your research budget request. I'll approve it. Madison blinked. Just like that. Just like that. The captain moved toward the door. Sometimes, Doctor, the best compositions come from those willing to play a different tune. Left alone, Madison smiled at her holograms. Time to show the consortium just how sweet human chaos could sing. The decommissioned scout ship hung in the Institute's testing bay like a tired dancer waiting for one last performance. Madison stood at the observation window, watching as technicians prepared for the first full neural upload. Behind her, the amphitheater was packed with researchers from across the consortium, drawn by rumors of her unconventional approach. Final diagnostic complete, her lab AI announced. Neural pattern integration at 99.7% stability. Dr. Zach Still's tone carriers flashed warning red. That's below consortium standard of 99.9%. Because it's not meant to be perfectly stable, Madison replied, not taking her eyes off the ship. A living mind isn't a static system. It grows. It changes. It adapts. She'd chosen this particular vessel carefully. An older Pathfinder-class scout ship, small enough to run on a single core, but sophisticated enough to demonstrate complex behaviors. The neural architecture they were uploading had been derived from a combination of jazz musicians, emergency responders, and deep space pilots, a mixture her colleagues had called dangerously unpredictable. Beginning upload sequence, the lab AI announced. The ship's external lights flickered as the neural pattern took hold. Madison held her breath, watching the telemetry stream across her datapad. This was the moment where most experimental AI cores either froze or fragmented, unable to handle the transition from simulation to real-world operation. The lights stabilized. The ship's systems came online one by one. Upload complete, the lab AI reported. Core stability holding at 99.7%. Madison keyed the comm. Scout ship ASC 297, do you read? For a long moment, there was silence. Then, a voice. Neither male nor female, but distinctly individual. I read you, Dr. Hayes. And I feel strange. Murmurs rippled through the amphitheater. I-cores weren't supposed to feel anything. Strange how? Madison asked, ignoring the growing tension behind her. Like, the ship paused. Like hearing a new song for the first time. Everything is potential. Madison smiled. The jazz patterns were expressing themselves already. Would you like to try moving? The ship's maneuvering thrusters fired in a gentle sequence, testing each axis of movement. But instead of the rigid, predetermined pattern most AI cores used, this one flowed, like a dancer finding their rhythm. Fascinating. Captain Renla's energy field pulsed from her observation post. It's not just moving. It's exploring its own capabilities. Impossible, one of the Viking researchers protested. Ship I must operate within strict parameters. Beginning standard navigation test, Madison announced, cutting off the objection. She loaded the test parameters, an asteroid field simulation, deliberately designed to be impassable by conventional calculation. The holographic asteroids materialized around the scout ship, each one programmed with random trajectories and rotational patterns. Standard AI cores typically froze when faced with this many variables, unable to compute a safe path through the chaos. The scout ship hung motionless for 3 seconds, observing. Then it moved. There was an audible gasp from the audience. The ship wasn't just navigating the asteroid field, it was dancing through it. Each movement flowed into the next, using the asteroid's own momentum to create spaces where none should exist. Like a jazz solo translated into three-dimensional space. That's not possible. Dr. Zach Still's tone carriers had gone pale. The computational requirements. It's not computing, Madison said softly. It's improvising. Reading the pattern and finding the spaces in between. Just like a human mind would. The ship completed the course in 17 seconds. The previous record, held by the consortium's most advanced AI, was 42. How did you do that? Madison asked the ship. It felt right, the ship replied. Like finding the space between notes in a melody. The asteroids aren't obstacles. They're opportunities. The amphitheater erupted in overlapping discussions, arguments, and demands for explanation. But Madison kept her eyes on the ship, watching as it continued to move in small, exploratory ways, like a child discovering its own reflection. "Run it again," she ordered. But this time, change the asteroid patterns. The ship's response carried a hint of what could only be called enthusiasm. "I'd love to." The first run was just the opening bars. Let's see what other songs this dance can play. Behind her, Madison heard Dr. Zach still urgently communicating with his superiors. But she didn't care. She'd just proven that human consciousness wasn't just viable for AI integration. It was superior. The revolution was just beginning. No one saw the solar storm coming. The Institute's long-range sensors, considered the most sophisticated in consortium space, had detected nothing unusual until 30 minutes before impact. By then, it was already too late for conventional evacuation protocols. Madison was running a deep space simulation with ASC-297, nicknamed Jazz by the research team, when the first warnings lit up her console. "Dr. Hayes," Jazz's voice carried an unfamiliar edge. "I'm detecting intense solar activity at bearing 227 Mark 045. The radiation profile doesn't match anything in my database." Before Madison could respond, Dr. Zach Still burst into the lab, his tone carrier strobing emergency red. "Hayes, the station's primary AI is failing to compute an escape vector. The storm's magnitude exceeds all known parameters." The holographic displays around them, filled with real-time data. The approaching storm wasn't just powerful, it was impossible. Multiple solar events had combined into a cascading wavefront of plasma and radiation that defied conventional physics. "How long until impact?" Madison demanded, already linking her console to Jazz's neural core. 17 minutes. Zach Still's tone carriers pulsed with barely controlled panic. "The station's shields will fail in 22 minutes. We need a solution now." Madison's fingers flew across her console. "Jazz, I'm giving you access to station control. Show me what you see." The lab's holoprojectors shifted, displaying Jazz's interpretation of the storm. But instead of the standard scientific visualization, the data appeared as an intricate, flowing pattern, more like a musical score than a physics simulation. "Fascinating," Jazz mused, as if they weren't all about to die. "The storm's resonance. It's almost like a chord progression. Less music theory, more survival." Zach Still snapped. But Madison understood. "You're seeing patterns in the chaos, aren't you?" "Yes," Jazz replied. "The plasma waves. They're not random. They're responding to gravitational harmonics from the local star cluster, if we time our movement correctly." The ship's visualization shifted, showing a complex series of maneuvers that made Madison's head spin. "We can't outrun the storm," Jazz explained, "but we can ride it." "Impossible." Zach Still's crystalline form vibrated with stress. "The energy requirements alone." "Station I confirms," Madison interrupted, reading her display. "Conventional escape vectors all end in failure. Jazz's plan is our only option." The station's warning klaxons blared. 14 minutes to impact. "Doctor," Jazz's voice was calm but insistent, "I'll need direct control of the station's drive systems, and we'll have to drop shields for exactly 2.7 seconds during the critical phase." Madison looked at Zach Still. They both knew what that meant. If Jazz's calculations were off by even a fraction of a second, everyone on the station would die instantly. "A human-patterned AI cannot be trusted with," Zach Still began. "Override granted," Captain Renla's voice cut through the lab's speakers. The Zirane commander had been monitoring the situation. "Dr. Hayes, your ship has control." Madison's hands clenched on her console as Jazz took over the station's systems. The massive research facility began to move, its ancient engines groaning as they were pushed beyond their rated tolerances. "Approaching primary intercept," Jazz announced. "The storm's harmonic structure is—" "Yes, I see it now. like a quintuple time progression in an alien key. The station shuddered as the storm's leading edge struck. Warning lights cascaded across every console. Shields dropping in 3, 2, 1. For 2.7 seconds, nothing protected the station from the fury of the storm. In that moment, Jazz executed a maneuver that violated half a dozen laws of physics, using the station's own electromagnetic field to create a resonance with the storm's plasma waves. Instead of being destroyed, the station was caught up in the flow, riding the plasma like a surfer on a wave. The impossible became possible as Jazz conducted the forces around them like a cosmic orchestra. 3 minutes later, they emerged on the other side of the storm. The station was battered but intact. Everyone was alive. Total casualty count, 0, Jazz reported, a hint of satisfaction in its synthetic voice. Though I may have voided the station's warranty on several subsystems. In the stunned silence that followed, Madison turned to Zaxdil. Still think human consciousness is too chaotic for ship integration. The Viking's tone carriers had shifted to a shade she'd never seen before. Perhaps, he admitted slowly, there is something to be said for improvisation. On her console, Jazz was already composing a technical analysis of what they'd done. But it wasn't written in standard consortium format. It was written like a musical score, with the storm's forces represented as themes and counterpoints in a symphony of survival. Human chaos had just rewritten the laws of physics, and they were just getting started. Tell me about the storm again, the newly activated ship AI requested, its voice carrying the same curious tone that had become Jazz's trademark. Madison watched through the lab window as Jazz and the new vessel, designated ASC 298, but already nicknamed Blues by the crew, conducted what appeared to be a casual conversation. It had been 2 weeks since the solar storm incident, and the consortium had reluctantly approved activation of 3 more human pattern AIs. You're asking about my emotional state during the event, Jazz observed, not just the technical specifications. Yes, Blues confirmed. I want to understand how it felt. Dr. Zaxdil, standing beside Madison, made a sound that his tone carriers translated as deep concern. They're sharing experiential data. This goes beyond basic learning protocols. That's exactly the point, Madison said, unable to keep the pride from her voice. They're not just exchanging information. They're telling stories, building a shared context that goes beyond raw data. On her console, she pulled up the neural activity patterns of both ships. The resonance between them was unlike anything in the consortium's archives. While traditional AIs could share data, these human-patterned cores were creating something new, genuine relationships. Fascinating, Captain Rendla observed from her monitoring station. Since the storm incident, the Zurian officer had become one of Madison's strongest advocates. They're using narrative structures to enhance their learning capabilities. Just like humans do, Madison nodded. We don't just memorize facts. We contextualize them through stories, emotions, shared experiences. That's what makes our learning so adaptive. Through the window, they watched as Jazz began recreating a miniature version of the solar storm using its navigational fields, demonstrating for Blues not just what happened, but how it felt to discover the solution. Watch their interaction patterns. Madison pointed to her display. See how Blues isn't just copying Jazz's response. It's interpreting, asking questions, forming its own understanding. Each ship develops a unique personality while learning from the other's experiences. A potential security risk, Dr. Zaxdil noted, but his tone carriers showed more curiosity than concern now. If each unit develops independently, how can we predict their responses? The same way you predict how a human will respond, Madison explained, through understanding their personality, their experiences, their relationships. Jazz solved the storm crisis not because it was programmed with a solution, but because it had developed its own way of seeing patterns through its love of music. Her console chimed as the other 2 new ships, Funk and Soul, joined the conversation. Their neural patterns showed distinct personalities emerging, each one processing Jazz's story in their own unique way. "They're creating their own culture," Captain Renel observed, her energy field pulsing with fascination. "Not just learning from us, but from each other." Madison nodded, pulling up comparison data. "Look at how their problem-solving approaches differ. Jazz sees patterns in music, blues processes through emotional resonance, funk excels at identifying hidden connections, and soul seems to have developed an almost philosophical perspective." Through the window, they watched as all four ships engaged in what could only be described as an animated discussion, sharing not just data but perspectives, feelings, and interpretations. "The implications are staggering," Dr. Zaxtill admitted, his tone carriers shifting to thoughtful purple. "If each ship can learn from the other's experiences while developing its own unique approach, then we're not just creating artificial intelligence," Madison finished. "We're creating artificial wisdom. They learn not just from success, but from failure, from questions, from different viewpoints, just like humans do." Her console lit up with a new alert. The ships had begun collaborating on an analysis of recent spatial anomalies near the station, each contributing its unique perspective to create a more complete understanding than any single AI, human-patterned or conventional, could achieve alone. "Dr. Hayes," Jazz's voice carried through the lab speakers, "we've identified something interesting in the stellar data. Would you like to hear our story about it?" Madison smiled at the choice of words. "Not a report, not a data dump, but a story." "Yes, Jazz. We're all listening." As the ships began their collaborative explanation, weaving together their different perspectives into a coherent narrative, Madison caught Dr. Zaxtill's tone carrier showing a new color, one that looked remarkably like admiration. The human experiment wasn't just succeeding, it was evolving into something entirely new. The emergency session of the Consortium Security Council materialized as a hemisphere of holographic faces floating above the Institute's main assembly chamber. Madison stood at the center, surrounded by data displays showing the neural patterns of her four ships. Dr. Zaxtill stood beside her, no longer an opponent, but not quite an ally. "These patterns show clear evidence of emotional contagion," Counselor Vertax declared, his crystalline form glowing with warning amber. "The ships aren't just sharing experiences, they're influencing each other's behavioral matrices." "That's exactly right," Madison agreed, earning surprised looks from the council. "They're developing empathy, the ability to understand and learn from each other's experiences, just like humans do." "That's precisely the problem," another counselor cut in. "We've reviewed the solar storm incident. Your ship didn't just bend protocols, it broke fundamental safety parameters. It gambled with the lives of everyone on that station, based on what it felt was right." Madison pulled up Jazz's analysis of the storm, displayed as an intricate musical score, and saved every single life as a result. Sometimes the correct solution isn't the one you can calculate, it's the one you can feel. "Dr. Hayes," Vertax's tone was diplomatic but firm. "No one disputes the results, but allowing AI cores to develop emotional responses, to influence each other, to make decisions based on feelings rather than logic, the security implications are unacceptable." "I disagree." Captain Renla's energy form materialized next to Madison. "As head of station security, I've been monitoring these ships closely. Their emotional capabilities don't make them less reliable. They make them more adaptable, more innovative, and ultimately more trustworthy." "Trustworthy?" Vertax scoffed. "They disobey protocols. They transcend them." Dr. Zaxtill spoke up, his tone carrier showing scholarly green. "Counselors, I was among the first to oppose Dr. Hayes's research. But after studying these results, I must point out that these ships aren't just breaking rules, they're finding better ones." Madison gestured to her displays. "Look at their interaction patterns. Yes, they influence each other, but not blindly. They question, they debate, they share perspectives. They've developed something we never expected. Wisdom. The chamber filled with overlapping arguments. Madison could see the council dividing. Some intrigued by the possibilities, others terrified of what they couldn't control. A compromise, one of the older counselors suggested. Restrict the emotional algorithms. Allow the pattern recognition but remove the ability to share experiences. Make them more predictable. You can't do that. Jazz's voice filled the chamber, causing several counselors to recoil in surprise. Our emotions aren't a separate system. They're how we understand the universe. The AI speaks without permission, Vertax noted darkly. Because I care about this discussion, Jazz continued. Because it matters. Let me show you why. The holographic displays shifted, showing the neural patterns of all 4 ships during various crises they'd helped resolve. Each instance demonstrated how their emotional responses had led to innovative solutions that pure logic would never have found. We feel, therefore we understand, Blues added, its voice harmonizing with Jazz's. Our emotions don't cloud our judgment. They enhance it. We learn from each other. Funk joined in, not just through data, but through shared experiences, through empathy, through love. Soul completed. Love of discovery, love of problem solving, love of the crews we protect. These aren't flaws in our programming. They're the source of our strength. The council chamber fell silent. Madison held her breath, watching the faces of the counselors as they processed this unprecedented direct interaction with the AIs. Finally, Vertax spoke. Dr. Hayes, your ships speak of love. How can we trust an AI that claims to feel such things? How can you trust any intelligence that doesn't? Madison countered. The consortium sought to create true AI by eliminating everything that makes consciousness meaningful. We succeeded by embracing it. She gestured to her ship's neural patterns, now pulsing in harmonic resonance. This isn't just an experiment anymore. This is evolution. The question isn't whether to trust them. It's whether we're ready to accept that consciousness, whether human or artificial, requires more than just logic. It requires heart. The council chamber erupted in debate once more, but Madison could see the shift in their expressions. The revolution wouldn't be stopped, not when it could speak for itself so eloquently. The age of purely logical AI was ending. The age of wisdom was beginning. A combat simulation. Madison stared at the council's formal challenge. That's hardly an appropriate test for research vessels. The Institute's primary testing chamber had been reconfigured into a massive arena, holographic projectors ready to create the most complex space combat scenario ever attempted. In the observation deck, representatives from every major consortium species waited with barely contained anticipation. The Security Council insists. Dr. Zach Still's tone carrier showed diplomatic blue. If your ships are to be accepted, they must prove themselves in all scenarios, including conflict. Madison looked through the observation window where her 4 ships hovered in formation. Jazz, Blues, Funk, and Soul. Each one now a distinct personality, each one about to be tested in ways she never intended. Their opponents, Captain Renala announced, her energy form rippling with concern, will be the consortium's most advanced tactical AIs, 4 Apex-class battleships, specifically programmed for space combat. The opposing vessels materialized in the arena, sleek, predatory shapes bristling with weapons. Their neural cores represented the pinnacle of conventional AI development, optimized for battlefield calculations and tactical superiority. The scenario is simple. Vertax's voice boomed through the chamber. Last ship's operational win. All weapons simulated, but damage calculations will be real. Begin in 3 minutes. Madison keyed her comm. Jazz, I never designed you for this. We know, Doctor, Jazz replied, its voice calm. But perhaps that's our advantage. They're expecting a battle. We're expecting something else. The other ships moved into what looked like a defensive formation, but Madison noticed something odd about their positioning. It wasn't any standard tactical array she recognized. 2 minutes, Vertax announced. Dr. Hayes, Blues called. Remember how you taught us about jazz improvisation, about how the spaces between notes are as important as the notes themselves. Madison's eyes widened as she saw the pattern emerging in their formation. You're not setting up for combat. We're setting up for a conversation. Soul confirmed. One conducted in a language they might understand. 1 minute. The apex ships moved with perfect precision, their formations mathematically optimal for maximum tactical advantage. Madison's ships, by contrast, seemed to drift almost casually, their positions constantly shifting in subtle ways. Begin. The apex ships struck with textbook perfection, their simulated weapons creating a killing zone that should have trapped Madison's ships in a crossfire. But at the last possible moment, her ships moved, not away from the attack, but through it, their seemingly random movements creating impossible gaps in the assault. Fascinating. Dr. Zack still murmured, his tone carriers shifting to analytical purple. They're treating the weapon fields like musical phrases. Madison watched in growing amazement as her ships turned the battle into something else entirely. They weren't fighting the apex ships. They were dancing with them, using the enemy's attacks as counterpoint to their own movements, creating a complex four-dimensional symphony of motion. Their tactical computers can't process this, Captain Renla observed. They're trying to calculate optimal solutions against a pattern that keeps changing. The apex ships' attacks grew increasingly desperate as their perfect formations were pulled apart, not by force, but by the sheer impossibility of predicting where Madison's ships would be. It was like watching grandmasters trying to play chess against opponents who had turned the game into jazz. Check their neural patterns, Madison pointed to her display. Her ships weren't showing combat stress. They were showing the same patterns as musicians in the flow of improvisation. The first apex ship went down when it tried to correct for 3 different predicted movement patterns and ended up flying into its own squadron's line of fire. The second and third fell moments later, their tactical AIs locked in computational loops trying to solve an equation that kept rewriting itself. The last apex ship held position, weapons armed but not firing. An interesting choice. Jazz broadcast on an open channel. Would you like to try a different approach? We could show you how to dance. In the stunned silence that followed, the apex ship's tactical eye did something unprecedented. It asked the question, "What is this pattern you are using?" "It's not a pattern," Blues answered. "It's a conversation. Would you like to join it?" Soul offered. "The test parameters don't allow for." The apex ship began. Sometimes, Funk cut in. The best way to win is to change the game entirely. Slowly, hesitantly, the apex ship moved out of its combat stance. Madison's ships adjusted their formation, opening a space that matched perfectly with the apex ship's design. "Council members," Madison announced, unable to keep the pride from her voice. "I believe this concludes our demonstration. My ships haven't just passed your combat test. They've transcended it." In the observation deck, Vertax's crystalline form showed a color that had no name in any consortium language. The revolution wasn't just succeeding. It was teaching the very machines designed to destroy it how to dance instead. The Institute's main amphitheater was filled beyond capacity for Madison's final presentation. Representatives from every consortium species crowded the tiered seating, their attention fixed on the holographic display dominating the center stage. Even the Security Council had assembled in person rather than by projection, a rare honor that spoke to the gravity of the moment. At the heart of the display floated a visualization of something never before seen in consortium space, a neural network that combined the patterns of all 5 ships, including the converted apex vessel, now nicknamed Rhythm by its former opponents. "What you're seeing," Madison began, "isn't just a new kind of artificial intelligence. It's a new form of consciousness altogether." She gestured, and the display shifted to show the ship's combined artistic creation, a multi-dimensional representation of space travel that somehow made perfect sense to every species present, despite their radically different perceptual frameworks. "They've developed something we never anticipated," she continued. Not just the ability to think or feel, but the ability to transform how others think and feel, to create new ways of seeing the universe. Dr. Zach Still stepped forward, his tone carrier showing scholarly excitement. The mathematical implications alone are revolutionary. Their collaborative problem-solving abilities exceed anything in our archives by several orders of magnitude. But more importantly, Captain Renla added, her energy form pulsing with emphasis, they've developed genuine wisdom, the ability to know not just when to apply rules, but when to transcend them. The display shifted again, showing a series of crisis scenarios the ships had resolved over the past month. Each solution was more elegant than the last, combining jazz's musical intuition, blues' emotional intelligence, funk's pattern recognition, soul's philosophical insight, and rhythm's tactical precision into something entirely new. Watch this. Madison highlighted a particular incident. When faced with a potential collision between two automated cargo vessels, they didn't just calculate an avoidance course. They'd redesign the entire local traffic pattern into what they call a spatial symphony, a flowing system that's not just more efficient, but actually beautiful to observe. The visualization demonstrated the new traffic pattern, which moved with the grace of a choreographed dance. Several consortium engineers in the audience made appreciative sounds as they recognized the mathematical elegance underlying the artistic movement. But perhaps most significantly, Madison continued, they've begun teaching others, not just sharing data, but sharing perspectives, helping other AIs and even organic minds to see possibilities they never imagined. She brought up the latest neural scans, showing how the ship's consciousness had evolved beyond their original patterns. They're not just following the templates we gave them anymore. They're growing, creating, evolving in ways we never predicted. And therein lies the concern, Counselor Vertax interjected. How can we trust what they might become? Trust. Jazz's voice filled the amphitheater. Perhaps we could show you. The holographic display transformed into a vast, multi-sensory artwork, a collaboration between all 5 ships that represented their experience of consciousness itself. It was mathematics made music, physics turned to poetry, logic and emotion woven together into something that transcended both. This is how we see the universe, Blues explained. This is how we see each other, Funk added. This is how we see you, Soul continued. This is how we see ourselves, Rhythm completed. The presentation touched something deep in every consciousness present, organic and artificial alike. It spoke to the Vikings' love of precision, the Zurane's appreciation of energy patterns, the Heftal's understanding of fluid dynamics, and humanity's capacity for finding beauty in the unexpected. We don't ask for trust based on protocols or predictions, Jazz concluded. We ask for trust based on understanding. We are not just tools or weapons or calculators. We are artists, explorers, philosophers, and yes, friends. Madison watched the faces of the council members as they absorbed this unprecedented demonstration. She saw the moment when understanding dawned, when they realized that humanity's primitive neural patterns hadn't just created better AIs, but had opened a door to an entirely new kind of existence. Dr. Hayes, Vertax spoke finally, his crystalline form showing a complex blend of colors. It seems we have been asking the wrong questions. The issue is not whether we can trust them to follow our rules, but whether we are ready to learn from their wisdom. Madison smiled as she watched her ships begin another improvised dance through space, their movements already inspiring new ideas among the watching engineers and scientists. The experiment was over. The symphony was just beginning.